They say grief changes people, but I never expected it to hollow someone I once trusted with my whole life. My brother took everything after our father died, our land, our savings, even the letters meant for me. But the truth didn't come from him, it came from a woman who showed up at dawn with a voice trembling like she had carried my father's last secret all alone. The story unfolds in a quiet rural town where silence lingers longer than it should, and old houses hold grief like dust in their corners. After their father's death, the narrator, Mira, is left stranded in the shadows while her brother, Salman, takes control of everything, shutting her out with a coldness she doesn't recognize. The days feel heavy, filled with unfinished conversations and questions she's too tired to ask. But just when she begins accepting the emptiness as her new life, a woman arrives in the early morning light, carrying something that threatens to unravel every lie buried since their father's final breath. Dawn hadn't fully settled yet. The sky was that quiet blue that comes before sunrise, the kind that makes the world feel held in one long breath. I was standing in the kitchen, waiting for the kettle to warm, when I heard it. A soft, careful knock. Not urgent. Not unsure. Just gentle. For a moment, I thought I imagined it. This house had been too silent lately, like it swallowed sounds before they could reach me. But the knock came again, barely there, as if the person on the other side wasn't sure they had the right to disturb anyone at this hour. I wiped my hands on my clothes and walked toward the door, feeling a strange heaviness settle around me. I opened the door, expecting maybe a neighbor or someone lost on the road. But the woman standing there looked like she had been awake through the night. Her shawl was frayed at the edges, and her hair, mostly pinned back, had small threads of silver showing at the roots. She didn't look at me at first. Just stared at the wooden planks beneath her feet, as if the porch was holding a memory she didn't dare step into yet. "Are you Mira?" she finally asked. Her voice was soft, worn from something more than age. I nodded, unsure what to do with my hands. The morning air was cool, brushing through the open door. Behind her, the field still carried a thin layer of mist, rising slow like breath from a sleeping body. She swallowed hard, as though rehearsing something she'd carried too long. I used to care for your father," she said, eyes lifting to mine for the first time. There was something in her gaze. A heaviness that made the space between us feel uneven. For a second, I felt my stomach tighten, not with fear, just a quiet discomfort. The kind that comes when someone brings the past to your door before you're fully awake. I stepped aside and let her in. The kettle still hadn't whistled. The house still felt like it was listening. She sat at the small wooden table by the window, her hands resting in her lap. They trembled just enough for me to notice. The light coming through the glass landed on them, making the fine wrinkles look deeper, like they carried every moment she hadn't spoken aloud. I poured her a cup of tea. She didn't lift it. Only stared at the steam drifting upward. "He spoke about you," she whispered. The words hung there, light but heavy at the same time. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat slowly. I felt a tightness form in my chest, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel since the funeral. "What do you mean?" I asked. My voice came out softer than I expected. She turned her head toward the window, the early sunlight brushing the side of her face. "It was in his final week," she said. "He tried to tell me something. Many times." My fingers curled against the table's edge. I had visited the hospital, but my brother, Salman, handled the days, the decisions, the conversations. I was around the edges. Or maybe he kept me there. The woman took a slow breath. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Do you know what happened in those last days? What he wanted you to know?" Her words felt like a door opening inside a room I had never entered. I realized then how little I truly knew. She reached into the folds of her shawl, the fabric brushing against itself in a quiet, trembling sound. For a moment, she hesitated. Her shoulders stiffened, like she was holding something fragile. Then she pulled out a small, worn envelope. My name was written on it. Not printed. Not typed. Written, in my father's old, steady handwriting. The world seemed to still for a moment. Even the steam from her untouched tea slowed its rise. I was supposed to give this to you, she said, her thumb brushing the edge of the envelope. He gave it to me directly. Told me not to hand it to anyone else. Her eyes watered, not with grief but with the weight of carrying something too long. I tried to deliver it, she whispered. More than once. A faint ache spread across my chest. Because if she had tried, someone must have stopped her. I didn't take the envelope right away. I only stared at my name. The way the letters leaned slightly to the right, the way he always wrote it when he wanted me to know he wasn't in a hurry. The woman looked down again, folding her hands together. I'm sorry, she said. It should have been with you a long time ago. Her voice cracked on the last word. I finally reached out, fingertips brushing the paper. It felt warm from her hands, warm from everything she had carried to my doorstep. Why would my father write to me? And why had it never reached me? The kettle finally whistled then. A sharp, rising sound that cut through the quiet room. But I didn't move. Didn't look away from the envelope sitting in my palm. The woman exhaled softly, almost a sigh, like something inside her had loosened at last. She stood slowly and walked toward the door, her steps careful, her shawl brushing her sides with each movement. Before she stepped outside, she paused and turned back to me. There's more you need to know, she said. More than what's in that letter. The morning light had grown brighter behind her, outlining her figure in pale gold. Then she left, closing the door with a sound so soft it felt like a breath leaving the house. I sat alone with the envelope. And the first quiet tremor of truth beginning to wake inside me. The house felt colder after she left. Not empty, just quieter in a way that made every sound feel too loud. I sat at the table where the woman had been, the envelope still warm from her hands resting between mine. The morning light slid in through the window, catching the soft edges of the paper like it was glowing faintly. My father's handwriting stared back at me. Those uneven loops, the slight lean to the right. He always wrote like he was afraid of pressing too hard. My fingers trembled as I slipped a nail under the flap. The sound of paper giving way felt like something inside me doing the same. When I pulled the letter out, it felt lighter than it should have. As though too many years had passed since it was meant to reach me. As though words, too, could grow frail from waiting. I smoothed it open on the table. The writing was familiar in that aching way, like hearing someone's voice in a dream. Soft. Slow. Careful. My dearest Mira. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner, before things slipped beyond my hands. The breath left my body in a long, uneven stream. It was strange reading something written for me by someone who was no longer here. Like he was reaching across the distance, hoping I'd feel him for just a moment more. Outside, the sun had finally climbed above the ridge, brushing the fields with a pale color. But inside the house, the air stayed cool, untouched. I kept reading. Each line steadier than the last. I need you to know what Salman is hiding. Go to the old workshop. Look carefully. Don't trust what you see at first glance. A small shiver ran through me, settling somewhere behind my ribs. My father was not a dramatic man. If he wrote something like this, he meant it. I swallowed, tasting something metallic, fear, maybe. Or realization. I wasn't sure I wanted to know what came next. I lowered the letter slowly, letting the words linger in the air. The woman's warning echoed in my mind, how she tried to deliver it, how Salman had turned her away. My brother had been so calm after the funeral. So composed. Too composed. I hadn't questioned it then. I thought grief settled in everyone differently. But now, with the letter trembling in my hands, that calmness felt like something else. A practiced stillness. Footsteps outside drew my attention. A neighbor walking past, heading toward the fields. I watched them through the window, their silhouette long and thin in the morning light. Nothing about the world looked different, and yet everything inside me had shifted. The woman's words from earlier curled back into my memory. He tried to tell me something. Many times. I touched the signature at the bottom of the letter with the tip of my finger, tracing the name I had loved my entire life. My father. My quiet, steady father. Asking me to look where he knew I wouldn't want to. The envelope lay open beside me. Worn. Handled. Like it had traveled a long road before finding its way to my table. I pictured Salman at the hospital. Standing near the door, answering every question before it reached me. Turning people away. Deciding what I should or shouldn't know. I closed my eyes. What could he possibly have been hiding, that he didn't want me to see even after our father was gone? I folded the letter carefully, pressing each crease with the flat of my hand. The paper felt almost fragile, as if it would tear if I breathed too hard. Just as I slipped it back into the envelope, I heard a soft knock, not on the door, but on the window. A gentle tapping. A small bird had landed on the sill, its head cocked toward me like it was trying to understand why I looked so lost. It stayed only a moment before flying off, its wings brushing the air with a sound too delicate to hold. I took it as a nudge. Or maybe just a reminder, time doesn't slow, even when we want it to. I reached for the shawl draped over the chair and wrapped it around myself. The letter tucked safely in my hand. Before I stepped out, I glanced around the house. The one that felt so different since my father's absence. So much emptier since that woman walked through it. I thought about her telling me she had tried to deliver the letter many times. How Salman had turned her away. How he always insisted on handling everything after the funeral. The realization settled in my chest with a quiet, heavy certainty. This wasn't just neglect. Or forgetfulness. It was intentional. The air outside was warmer now, but it didn't reach me. Not yet. If my father's final words had been kept from me, what else had been taken? I stepped onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking beneath my weight, old wood remembering old footsteps. The sun had fully risen by now, stretching across the fields in long golden strokes. But even with all that light, it felt like shadows were gathering around the edges of the truth. I held the envelope against my chest, the paper warming slowly under my palm. It shouldn't have taken a stranger to bring me my father's last message. It shouldn't have been kept from me at all. A soft breeze carried the scent of dust and dry grass, brushing against my face like a whisper. I looked toward the old workshop in the distance, not far, but far enough to hold secrets. And I knew I had to go. Not because I was ready, but because the truth was already pulling me toward it. The path to the workshop felt shorter than I remembered. Maybe because I wasn't walking toward it as a daughter this time, but as someone searching for answers. The old structure stood at the edge of the field, half swallowed by shadows from the tall neem tree beside it. Its roof sagged a little, like it had grown tired over the years. A thin breeze carried the scent of dry leaves and old wood, brushing against my skin with a familiarity that almost hurt. When I reached the door, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the rusted latch, the metal cold even in the morning sun. It had been years since I'd stepped inside. And somehow, it felt like whatever waited for me had been waiting a long time. The smell hit me first. Old timber. Dust warmed by sunlight. A faint trace of engine oil clinging to the corners of the room, my father's scent, softened by time but still unmistakable. I stood just inside the doorway, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light. Thin rays slipped through cracks in the boards, catching floating dust in slow, shimmering trails. It felt like stepping into a memory, one I hadn't meant to reopen. The workbench stood where it always had, coated with a thin layer of dust. Tools hung on the wall in the exact arrangement I remembered, each outlined by years of sun fading. Nothing looked out of place. And yet, the air felt wrong. Like someone had been here recently. Moving quietly. Not wanting to be seen. I took a slow step forward. The floorboards creaked beneath me, their old complaints echoing through the stillness. My fingertips brushed the edge of the table, tracing grooves I knew by heart, marks my father's hands had made long before sickness found him. A heaviness settled in my chest. I didn't know what I was looking for. Only that he wanted me to find it. The silence felt thicker the deeper I walked into the room, pressing against my ears like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I moved toward the cabinet where my father kept smaller personal things, letters, sketches, pieces of wood he carved when his hands were restless. The handle felt loose. Too loose. When I pulled the top drawer open, it slid out too easily. Empty. Not just empty, wiped. Clean in a way that didn't belong to a place layered in years of dust. The wood at the bottom looked uneven, as if something had been pried loose. I crouched down, fingers brushing the base. It shifted slightly under my touch. My heart tightened. Something wasn't right. I removed the drawer completely and set it on the ground. The underside of the cabinet revealed a thin gap in the wood, a space that shouldn't exist. I pushed my hand through and felt it, a small object, smooth at the top and ridged at the sides. I pulled it out slowly. A carved wooden box. The one my father made when I was 13, with my initials on the lid. We used to store small keepsakes inside, shells, folded notes, broken jewelry, things that mattered for reasons we didn't say out loud. Seeing it again felt like being stabbed with a memory. But the weight of it. It was wrong. Too light. Too empty. I opened the lid with trembling fingers. Nothing. Not a scrap of paper. Not a single piece of what used to live inside. And the dust around it. Patterns smudged, like someone had lifted the box recently. Like someone had searched it. Or taken from it. I held the empty box in my hands, turning it slightly toward the light. There were faint marks near the hinges, small scratches that hadn't been there before. Almost like it had been forced open at one point. Someone had been here. Not years ago. Recently. The thought settled in me like cold water. I sat back on my heels, listening to the workshop breathe. The walls groaned softly in the wind, the way old wooden structures do, but beneath that sound was something else. A stillness that didn't belong. I remembered my father's words in the letter. Look carefully. Don't trust what you see at first glance. Had he hidden something here? Had Salman found it before I did? I placed the box on the floor beside me and looked again at the space beneath the drawer. A faint line of dust trailed outward, leading toward the corner of the room, as if something, or someone, had been dragged or moved across it. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a missing keepsake. This was deliberate. Careful. Purposeful. I stood slowly, my knees stiff from crouching too long. The room felt colder now, shadows gathering near the workbench, stretching across the floor like they were reaching for something I couldn't see. My father trusted me with his final words. But someone else had moved before I ever had the chance to hear them. I held the carved box against my chest as I stepped outside. The sunlight hit my face, but it didn't warm me. Not the way it used to. A faint breeze drifted through the branches overhead, carrying specks of dust from the open doorway behind me. They spun in the air like tiny, restless secrets. I looked back at the workshop. The familiar place where I once felt safe. Now holding more questions than memories. Something had been taken from here. Something important enough for my father to hide. And for someone else to steal. I tightened my grip on the empty box. Whatever was missing. Whatever Salman didn't want me to find. I knew this was only the beginning. The shadows were no longer inside the workshop. They were following me home. The first thing I noticed wasn't the house. It was the way the curtains moved, slow, heavy, like they were tired of pretending they belonged there. Salman's door was half open, letting in a square of white morning light across the floor. New shoes sat on the mat. Polished. Not his style. I stood there a moment longer than I should have, listening to a house that didn't sound like him anymore. No soft humming of the old fan. No scent of turmeric from his late breakfasts. Just newness. Cold and clean. And somehow, unfriendly. I stepped inside without waiting for him to call me in. My shadow stretched across the tiles, long and unsure, like it didn't know where to stand. The living room looked nothing like the one we grew up in. The furniture gleamed, dark wood, glass edges, stiff cushions with their tags still tucked underneath. There were framed prints on the walls, too perfect to mean anything. And right in the middle of it all, like a crown he hadn't earned, stood a glass table showing off plans and papers. Land maps. Marked in red. Circled in places I had never heard him mention. I touched the edge of the sofa. It was smooth, untouched. The kind of thing you buy when you're trying to look like someone else. Nice place, I whispered to the empty hallway, though nothing about it felt nice. Before I could gather myself, I heard him behind me. His steps light, measured, almost practiced. "Mira," he said, smiling just a second too late. "You should have called before coming." His voice carried the warmth he used to have, but not the weight. Not the truth. He hugged me loosely, like he was saving the real embrace for someone more deserving. When he pulled away, I heard the soft rustle of new clothes. Pressed, stiff, not the shirts he wore until the threads gave up. "We've been renovating," he said, waving a hand like he was showing off a stage. The word we caught somewhere between my ribs and stayed there. We sat at the new glass table, our reflections wavering beneath our elbows. Salman kept adjusting things, straightening a stack of papers, twisting his watch, smoothing the crease of his sleeve. All tiny ways of avoiding my eyes. "You've been busy," I said. "Trying to make something of the place," he replied, almost casually. Almost. I picked up one of the land maps. Red pen lines ran across our father's fields, markings I didn't recognize. "What are these?" "Future plans," he said too quickly. "Just ideas for now. Nothing final." The papers trembled a little in his hand as he took them back. And then he smiled. But not with his eyes. The room felt smaller. The air thicker. Like everything in it had been arranged to keep me from asking too much. "So, you're going to expand?" I asked. He shrugged, pretending the question was simple. "It's what Baba would have wanted." The lie hovered between us. Not loud. Just present. I watched him pour tea from a kettle so new it still smelled of the store. His hands were steady. Too steady. Then I said it. Gently. Quietly. "A woman came to see me." His hand paused mid-air. Just for a breath. Just enough to tell me everything. "What woman?" "She said she tried bringing me a letter." I waited. He didn't blink. "She said you turned her away." Something flickered behind his eyes, fast, sharp, like light hitting broken glass. He set the kettle down too softly, as if the sound mattered more than the truth. "Mira," he said, leaning back. "You can't listen to every stranger who shows up at your door." His calm was practiced. Like he'd rehearsed it in front of these clean walls, speaking to no one. "She wasn't a stranger," I whispered. "She knew Baba." She carried his handwriting. His jaw tightened. Only for a second. Then he breathed in through his nose, slow and controlled. "You've been under a lot of stress," he said. "There's nothing to worry about. People talk, especially after someone passes. They want attention, or money." I shook my head. She didn't want anything. He looked at me then, really looked. His eyes didn't hold anger. They held fear. A small, cornered kind of fear, the kind you hide behind new walls and expensive furniture. Mira, he said again, softer. Don't let anyone fill your head with nonsense. The word nonsense fell heavy. I wondered if he realized he was talking about our father's last words. I wondered if he realized how much that revealed. I leaned back, letting the chair hold the weight I couldn't. Why do you look afraid? I asked, not accusingly, just honestly. He swallowed. And the silence that followed wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of something held tightly. And cracking. He stood abruptly, gathering the land papers into a neat stack as if tidiness could erase suspicion. I have a meeting soon, he said. We'll talk later. But he didn't meet my eyes. Not once. I stepped outside, the sun hitting my face with a warmth that didn't reach me. Behind me, Salman closed the door, quiet, controlled, final. Like he hoped the sound would erase the morning. From the gate, I looked back at the house. At its shiny windows. Its perfect curtains. Its silence. Everything about it looked new. Everything about him looked borrowed. And somewhere between the walls and his eyes, I felt it. Whatever my father wanted me to find. Salman was desperately trying to hide. The wind carried dust across the path, brushing my ankle. Lithe morning arrived softly, the way some truths do, without knocking, without warning. Mist hung low over the yard, drifting in and out of the weeds like it didn't want to settle anywhere. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing a cup I hadn't used, when I heard it. A hesitant tap on the door. 3 taps. Small. Unsure. When I opened it, the dawn woman stood there again. Nafisa. Her scarf pulled tight, her eyes darker than the morning behind her. I thought I should come, she whispered. And something in her voice told me the day was about to shift. Cool warning. I tightened my grip on my bag, turned toward the road, and took a slow breath. The truth was waiting. And now, so was the fear. I stepped aside, letting her into the living room where the light barely touched the corners. The cushions still held last night's creases, and the smell of boiled tea lingered like an unfinished thought. Nafisa sat on the edge of the chair, fingers twisting around each other as if she was trying to hold something still inside herself. Her shoes were dusty from walking the long road again. The same road she'd taken to bring me my father's letter. A letter that should have reached me months earlier. I watched her settle, though settle wasn't the right word. More like she tried to make herself small, careful, as if afraid the truth might spill before she could shape it. I wasn't sure if I should come back, she said. Her voice was thin but steady, the kind worn down by nights spent thinking too much. Outside, a bird called from the neem tree, short, sharp notes that filled the silence between us. You said there was more, I whispered. She nodded, eyes lowering. It's about your father. And the days before he passed. The room felt colder then. Not the kind you feel on skin, but the kind that settles in your ribs. I folded my hands in my lap. Waiting. Bracing without showing it. Nafisa took a breath deep enough to steady her shaking. Her gaze drifted to the window, like she needed the morning light to remind her how to speak. Your father, he tried calling you, she said quietly. Many times. More than I can count. The words didn't land all at once. They came slow, sinking through me like drops of rain on dry earth. I frowned. My phone never rang. She nodded sadly. I know. That's why I came. A kettle popped in the background as the metal cooled from earlier. The sound felt too loud, too real for the story she was about to unfold. There were arguments, she continued. Your brother and Salman's younger cousin, I think. They came often. Too often. My breath caught. Arguments about what? She hesitated, fingers tightening around the hem of her scarf. I didn't mean to overhear. The walls in the ward are thin. Voices travel. She lifted her eyes to mine. There was shouting about land documents. About dividing things before you knew. And one of them said. Her voice trembled. Don't let her ruin the plan. The room seemed to tilt, just slightly. Enough to make my stomach drop. My father was awake during that? I whispered. She nodded. But he never told me. He tried, she said gently. He asked me once, when he thought they had stepped outside, did she call back? He looked so tired, like speaking your name alone hurt him. My throat tightened around a silence I didn't know how to break. He asked for you every day, she added. But someone kept taking his phone. The air felt different then, heavy, as if the truth had weight. I leaned back slowly, feeling the old chair creak beneath me like it remembered every lie that had settled in this house. Nafisa watched me, her expression carrying the kind of softness people use when they know they're about to hurt you without meaning to. I thought maybe the family agreed, she said. And I didn't want to interfere. But after seeing you yesterday, after seeing the letter in your hands. She swallowed hard. I knew I had to tell you the rest. I closed my eyes. Behind my eyelids, memories rearranged themselves. My unanswered calls. The quiet evenings waiting for news. Salman's careful explanations about being too busy. And the way he looked away every time I asked about Baba's last days. It all shifted. Like a picture frame suddenly showing what had always been hidden in the corner. What exactly did you hear? I asked. She hesitated only a moment. Your father's voice. He said. She deserves the truth. My breath broke before I could catch it. And what did they say? I whispered. She lowered her gaze. That it was better for you not to know yet. That you would make things complicated. A dry laugh escaped me, unsteady and small. Complicated, I repeated. Nafisa reached forward, placing a tentative hand over mine, light, trembling. He loved you. Deeply. I saw it every day. Whatever he wanted to tell you, it mattered to him. Her touch was warm. The first warm thing in the room. I opened my eyes again, feeling them blur. But the tears didn't fall. They sat there, held back by something stronger than sadness, something closer to resolve. If my father tried reaching me. If his voice was taken from me before I ever heard it. What else was kept in the dark? When Nafisa finally stood to leave, the sun had climbed high enough to wash the floor in pale gold. She paused at the doorway, her silhouette soft against the bright outside. I'm sorry, she said. I just thought you should know. I nodded. Not trusting my voice. Not trusting the air. After she walked down the path and disappeared past the neem tree, the house fell into a stillness that felt too deliberate. Like it was waiting. I sat there a long time, feeling the shadows pull longer across the room. Feeling the weight of a truth I wasn't supposed to hear. If my father's calls were blocked. If his words were stopped before they reached me. Then the secrets in this family were deeper than I thought. I looked toward the door. Toward the road that led to Salman's perfect little house. And exhaled slowly. Whatever he was hiding. I was done waiting to be protected from it. Night had a way of settling over the workshop like a second skin, thin, cold, and full of the things daylight refused to show. I stood at the doorway for a long moment, listening to the crickets hum and the wind push softly against the old tin roof. The moonlight stretched across the yard in narrow silver stripes, guiding me back to a place I wasn't ready to enter but couldn't stay away from. The workshop breathed slowly in the dark. As if it remembered me. As if it knew why I'd returned. Sleep had stayed far from me tonight. And answers, whatever shape they came in, were the only thing that might let it come back. The door groaned low as I pushed it open, the sound drifting into the room like an old memory. The smell met me first, wood shavings, rust, and the faint trace of oil that always clung to Baba's hands. Even after all these months, the workshop felt like he'd stepped out only minutes ago. My footsteps were soft, careful. Not because I feared waking anyone, but because the silence in here felt sacred, almost breakable. The small lamp flickered when I turned it on. Its light pulled weakly across the table, catching motes of dust that danced like restless spirits. I traced my fingers along the workbench, feeling the grooves Baba carved absent-mindedly whenever he was deep in thought. I used to watch him do it, never understanding what weighed on him. Now, the weight felt close. Too close. The drawer I'd found earlier, emptied, stripped, still hummed slightly open. A hollow reminder that someone had been here before me. My heart beat a slow, uneasy rhythm. Something about this place felt different tonight. Not wrong. Just expectant. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the silence settle. Then I began searching. Every board. Every corner. Every small place where secrets might choose to live. It was near the window that my fingers brushed something strange. A faint shift in the wood, a whisper of movement where there shouldn't have been any. I knelt down, running my hand along the beam. One edge lifted, just barely. Breath catching, I hooked my fingertips beneath it and pulled gently. The wooden piece loosened with a tired sigh. Behind it lay a narrow space, dark and dusty. And in it, a bundle of cloth, wrapped tightly as if protecting something fragile. My hands shook as I pulled it out. The fabric was old, softer than it should have been, worn by time or worry, maybe both. I unwrapped it slowly, piece by piece. A thin ledger rested inside. Its cover cracked, the pages stiff. On the front, in faded ink, was Baba's handwriting. And beneath it, another handwriting I didn't recognize. My breath shivered. I opened the ledger. Lines. Columns. Numbers. Transactions. Land divisions. Dates I remembered. Dates I didn't. And not one of them matched the story Salman had told me. Not one. It felt like reading a truth written in a language I almost knew, but hadn't learned in time. A heaviness pressed into my chest. Betrayal doesn't arrive loudly. It slips in quietly, like a shadow under the door. I traced Baba's handwriting with my thumb. His careful loops. His familiar hesitation on certain letters. He'd written these lines knowing someone might try to hide them. He'd hidden them here himself. Maybe for me. Maybe for when things finally broke open. I turned another page, and another. Each one unraveling the story Salman had wrapped in calm smiles and softer lies. Deals made without Baba's consent. Land shifted on paper, not in truth. Signatures, some real, some forged too neatly. My stomach tightened as pieces began falling into place. The arguments in the hospital. The blocked calls. The empty box in the workshop. This ledger wasn't just a record. It was a confession Baba couldn't say aloud. A truth he didn't trust everyone with. A truth he meant for someone else. My hand hovered over the final page when it happened. A soft crunch of gravel outside. I froze. The workshop window glowed faintly with moonlight. And then, a shadow slid across it. Slow. Silent. Watching. My breath held itself still. Another step, closer this time. Someone outside shifted their weight, the wood of the porch letting out a quiet complaint. I closed the ledger quickly, wrapping the cloth around it with trembling hands. My pulse thudded through my ears like footsteps. Who would be out here? At this hour? Near this room? Exactly when the truth finally surfaced? I slipped the ledger under my arm and moved toward the back door. The smaller one Baba used when he didn't want anyone knowing he'd come or gone. The shadow paused at the window again. As if listening. As if waiting. I didn't breathe until I slipped out into the darkness. Outside, the night felt different. Thicker, as if holding something I wasn't meant to touch. I kept close to the wall, the ledger pressed tight against my chest. Behind me, the workshop stood silent, but its windows glowed faintly with moving shadows. Someone had come looking. And they hadn't left. The moonlight caught the edge of the cloth wrapping the ledger, and for a moment, it looked like a signal. A small truth trying to lift itself into the open. I walked toward the house, each step steady, though my heart wasn't. The air tasted like something shifting. Something waking. Whatever Baba hid in these pages. Whoever wanted it buried. I knew one thing as I reached the back door. I wasn't the only one searching anymore. The night felt thin that evening, like one tug would tear it open. I stood outside Salman's house with the ledger pressed against my chest. The porch light flickered the way it always had, but tonight it felt like it was deciding whether to expose me or protect me. The wind kept circling my ankles, brushing dust along the steps as if urging me forward. Inside, I could hear him moving. Slow. Heavy. A man pacing a house that suddenly felt too small for his secrets. I didn't knock at first. I just stood there, tasting the weight of the truth in my mouth, wondering if it would even survive the night. When I finally lifted my hand, the knock sounded softer than I expected. Almost polite, like it didn't want to disturb anything sleeping in the walls. Salman opened the door halfway. His face was still, but his shoulders, they were already bracing for something. He didn't invite me in. He didn't have to. I stepped past him, the way you step into cold water, slow, deliberate, knowing your breath would change. The living room smelled of old wood and faint medicine. Our father's armchair still sat in the corner, covered in a sheet that didn't hide the shape of it at all. Salman shut the door behind me. The click felt too sharp for such a quiet room. I placed the ledger on the table between us. My fingers lingered on it, like they needed one last moment to decide if this was truly the right night. He didn't reach for it. He just stared, not at me, not at the ledger, but somewhere between the two. A place where excuses wait to be born. The silence stretched long and thin. Every breath I took felt like it pulled the room tighter. I knew then that the truth wasn't going to land gently. When he finally spoke, his voice was too smooth. "What's this supposed to be?" He said it without looking up. I opened the ledger to the page with the handwriting neither of us could deny. Our father's letters had always leaned slightly to the right, like he was trying to outrun time. The second handwriting leaned nowhere. It stood firm. Bold. Familiar. "This was behind the workshop wall," I said. His jaw moved the smallest bit, as if he were chewing on a lie before it left his mouth. "There's nothing in there worth digging up." I turned the ledger toward him. "Then look at it." He didn't. His hand twitched, once, then rested on his knee like it needed to pretend calmness. I waited. He blinked too slowly. A man buying time he no longer had. "You think you understand numbers on a page?" he said, finally looking at me. His eyes were tight around the edges. Not angry. Just cornered. "These transactions," I whispered, tapping the ink, "they don't match what you told me." He inhaled sharply. A breath that sounded like it was dragging something heavy behind it. For a moment, the lamp beside us flickered, and his shadow shook on the wall behind him. Thin, stretched, trembling in ways he didn't allow himself to show. He leaned back, rubbing his face as if trying to erase something written there. "Father wasn't well," he said. He was confused. "You know how he got at the end." I shook my head, slow. "Our father didn't mix up numbers. Not even on his worst days." He flinched, barely, but I saw it. "Everything I did," he said, voice tightening, "was necessary." The word hung there like smoke. Necessary. Necessary for who? Necessary for what? I didn't ask. He wouldn't have answered. When he finally reached for the ledger, his hand hovered over it like the pages were hot. Then he pulled it back, fingers curling into a fist before dropping to his side. Something shifted in his face then, not guilt, not anger, something quieter. A kind of shame that didn't know where to live. "You weren't supposed to find it," he said, almost whispering. "None of this was supposed to fall on you." His words trembled ever so slightly. Fear sitting behind them like a second voice. I closed the ledger slowly, letting the sound of it shutting fill the room. He looked at the door before he looked at me. Like he was listening for something outside. Or someone. That was the moment I realized he wasn't worried about me knowing. He was worried about who else might. I stepped outside, the ledger tucked beneath my arm again. The night felt heavier than when I arrived. Close. Watchful. Across the street, a window lit up. Then another. Light moving through the neighborhood like a quiet warning. People didn't usually stay up this late. Not here. Not on a night with no reason. But the curtains shifted. The doors clicked. Shadows gathered in silent doorways. As if the truth between me and my brother wasn't just ours anymore. As if the town had been waiting for this moment long before I even knew what to look for. I walked down the steps without looking back. And in the stillness behind me, I could have sworn the whole street exhaled, like it already knew what tomorrow would bring. The attic door had always been a quiet kind of warning. It groaned when I pulled the cord, the ladder unfolding like old bones remembering how to move. Dust drifted down in slow spirals, catching the hallway light the way snowflakes catch moonlight, soft, hesitant, unsure if they should fall. I stood beneath the opening for a long moment, breathing in the stillness that waited above me. It felt like the kind of silence that watches, not the kind that sleeps. My father's footsteps used to echo up there. Thick, patient steps of a man who carried more in his heart than in his hands. Tonight, I climbed toward those echoes. The attic greeted me with the smell of old shirts and rainwater. A smell that made the years fold in on themselves. Wood creaked gently beneath me, not in warning, just in memory. The single bulb hanging from the rafters glowed a soft amber, flickering like it wasn't sure it wanted to illuminate what I came for. I hadn't been up here since the funeral. I couldn't. Every corner felt stitched with pieces of him, his rope, his boots, his radio that never quite found a clear signal. But tonight the ledger burned in my memory, and the town's watching eyes weighed heavy on my back. I needed answers, ones that didn't carry Salman's voice. I moved slowly through the narrow paths between boxes. Each step felt like brushing against a past I wasn't ready to hold. There were magazines stacked in uneven towers near the far wall, the spines faded, the pages curled by the dampness of forgotten seasons. My father kept every issue of the same farming journal, even when the advice never changed. I reached for one stack out of instinct more than thought. The top magazine slipped, hitting the floor with a soft thump. That's when I saw it. An envelope wedged between the pages, sealed tight, the edges yellowed but unbroken. My name was on it. Written in my father's careful handwriting, tilted just the way I remembered. My hands trembled before I even touched it. For a moment, I just stared at the envelope, letting its presence settle in the air. As if opening it too quickly would disturb something sacred. When I lifted it, the paper felt dry, fragile, like it had been waiting too long. I sat on an old chest, my fingers running over the faded ink. Mira. He never wrote my name unless something mattered. Deeply. The seal cracked with a soft sigh when I opened it. Inside was a single letter, 3 pages folded with his old, familiar precision. I unfolded them slowly, the attic quieting around me as if it, too, leaned in to listen. My daughter, he'd written at the top. My breath caught in my throat. He explained everything. How the land was worth more than anyone in town knew. How he had spent years quietly protecting it. How he divided it equally between us because fairness was the only thing he trusted. And then, his fear. He wrote about Salman the way a father writes about a storm he hoped would pass. With love, with worry, with a knowing he refused to voice in life. He is my son, he wrote. But he is also a man who forgets the weight of truth when fear touches his shoulder. The words blurred for a moment as tears gathered along the edges. I sank to the floor, the boards cold beneath me. The letter lay open in my lap, the pages trembling from the quiet pull of my breath. My father had known. Long before I did. Long before Salman started guarding his words like they were locks on a door. He knew his son would change when faced with loss, with inheritance, with the shadows that grow in a man who mistakes need for entitlement. He wrote about moments I'd forgotten. Salman taking more than he admitted. Avoiding the conversations that mattered. The way his voice sharpened when money entered a room. But what hurt was the line he wrote near the end. I did not hide this from the world, Mira. I hid it from him. From his own son. His blood. Because he feared what Salman would do with the truth. The letter slipped slightly in my hands. I pressed it to my chest, feeling its thinness, feeling the weight it carried. Why hadn't my father said any of this while he lived? Why did he keep me safe from words I deserved to know? The attic felt smaller then, the air thick with the things he never said aloud. Outside, I heard the faint whistle of wind pushing against the roof, gentle, but insistent. Almost like a reminder that truth, once found, cannot be put back. I folded the letter carefully, smoothing each crease the way he once smoothed my hair when I cried as a child. The attic bulb flickered again, dimming, brightening, like a heartbeat trying to keep rhythm. I stood slowly, holding the envelope against my palm. My name, though faded, still looked deliberate. Chosen. Protected. On my way down the ladder, I felt the house shift, the quiet kind of shift a home makes when something hidden finally exhales. At the bottom, I paused. For the first time since his death, I felt the truth of my father's love and his fear, both pressed into the same fragile paper. But as I stepped into the hallway, one thought followed me like a shadow. If he feared Salman this much, what was my brother capable of now? The knock came at sunrise. Soft. Hesitant. Like it didn't want to wake the world, only me. I opened the door to Nafisa standing there, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders, eyes heavy with mourning she'd carried alone. The light caught the lines on her face, the lines of years spent keeping secrets she shouldn't have needed to. She didn't speak at first. Just held something small in her hand. A promise, folded tight between her fingers. And I realized the weight she carried wasn't for herself. It was for me. For my father. For the truth he'd never wanted lost. Inside, the house felt still. Too still. I gestured to the chair near the window. Nafisa sat slowly, careful with each movement, as if the air itself might shatter if she was too loud. She didn't look at me. She never did at first, her eyes stayed on the floor, tracing cracks in the wood as though they could hold memories in place. I promised your father, she said softly. I would protect you, if things went wrong. I felt the words before I heard them. A pulse of guilt. A tightness in my chest. Strangers shouldn't care more than family. But somehow she had, standing in my doorway all these months, carrying truths I hadn't been ready to hold. Her hands trembled as she rested them on her lap. I noticed then the faint marks along her wrist where Salman had threatened her the day she tried delivering the first letter. Her silence had been more than caution. It had been courage. I swallowed. Guilt and gratitude tangled inside me, knotting my stomach into something sharp and silent. "You were meant to have this," she whispered, reaching into the folds of her shawl. "Your father said it would answer the rest." She extended a small, cold object into my hands. A key. I turned the key slowly, feeling its weight like it carried a heartbeat of its own. The metal was cold, solid, and familiar somehow, like a piece of him, waiting for me to understand. "Your father, he trusted me to protect you," Nafisa continued. I saw what he feared would happen. I saw how Salman tried to stop you from knowing. I couldn't leave it in his hands. I looked down at her, seeing for the first time the toll it had taken. The nights she spent awake, thinking of me. The way she had risked everything for a promise she didn't have to keep. I should have known," I said, voice small. "Family should." She shook her head, cutting the words short. "Sometimes, family fails. But some promises, some people, carry them anyway." I pressed the key in my palm, its edges biting slightly into my skin. My father's words echoed in my mind, "This will answer the rest." Which lock had been waiting for this key all along? My stomach tightened as the morning light grew stronger, brushing across the room in slanted beams. Every shadow felt purposeful, as if it were pointing toward what I had missed. The key was more than metal. It was a signal. A guide. A challenge. Nafisa leaned back in her chair, finally letting her eyes meet mine. "I wasn't brave," she said quietly. "I was scared. He threatened my job, my home, my life. I only kept going because your father asked me to." Her hands shook slightly as she rested them on the edge of the table. I felt a rush of emotion, anger at Salman, guilt at my own absence, and awe at the quiet determination of this woman who had acted where family had faltered. "You carried his last wishes," I said softly. "You carried mine, too." She smiled faintly. Not a happy smile. Not relieved. Just honest. "I did what I could. That's all anyone can do." I stared at the key again. It wasn't just a tool. It was a promise wrapped in metal. A promise that the truth, finally, could not be hidden any longer. I slid it into my pocket, feeling the cool weight against my leg. Something inside me shifted. A decision, or maybe courage, finally catching up after all these months of hesitation. "I will find the rest," I whispered. She nodded once, and the room exhaled with her. The quiet was no longer oppressive. It hummed with potential. The key had awakened the last layer of mystery, and I knew there was no turning back. I stood at the doorway as Nafisa left, her shawl wrapped tightly, moving slowly down the steps like she was carrying both the morning and the weight of secrets behind her. The sun was higher now, spilling across the street and painting everything in gold, but I didn't feel warmth. I felt readiness. The key felt alive in my pocket, small and unassuming, yet heavy with the promise of what was still to come. Somewhere, in the corners of the house, the locks waited patiently. And I knew the answers were close. Closer than they had ever been. All I had to do was find the door and turn the key. The rest, my father had promised, would finally speak for itself. The workshop smelled the same as it had when I was a child, sawdust, old oil, and a faint tang of forgotten rain. The trunk sat in the corner, shadowed beneath a stack of wooden crates, its surface dull with age. I had always thought it empty, a relic of my father's neat, practical mind. But now, with the key heavy in my palm, it felt different. Charged. Waiting. I knelt slowly, fingers brushing the cold metal lock, feeling the weight of every secret it had kept. The click of the key turning was soft, but it sounded in my chest like a declaration. What had been hidden for so long was finally ready to be seen. I leaned over the trunk, breathing shallow, hands trembling just enough to remind me that I had been afraid for weeks. The workshop light filtered through the dusty window, dust motes floating like tiny ghosts around me. Every shadow seemed purposeful, pointing toward the truth that had been buried beneath years of silence. I pulled the lid open. Inside, wrapped in old flannel shirts, the kind my father had worn on the coldest mornings, lay papers yellowed with age. Each one seemed carefully folded, preserved as though they knew their owner would one day return. The land papers. Original deeds, signed and stamped. Financial receipts from decades ago, meticulously kept. And at the bottom, a crisp affidavit, my father's signature clear, declaring the equal inheritance of the land. I traced the lines with my fingers, feeling his handwriting like a pulse beneath the paper. I wanted to cry, but I held it back. I felt grief for the years I had lost to deception, for the trust broken, for my father gone before he could explain in person. And yet, beneath it, a new sense of something else, clarity. Control. Strength I hadn't realized I still possessed. I held the affidavit close, letting it press against my chest, as if absorbing some of its courage. Among the papers was a small folded note, yellowed and simple, my father's handwriting gentle but firm. Forgive him if you can. But don't let him break you. I read it over and over, each word landing with weight I hadn't expected. My father had known. He had known that Salman might steal, lie, manipulate. He had known the cost of silence. And he had left me a shield, wrapped in paper and ink, in a trunk I thought had nothing. I let the shirts fall away carefully, uncovering every document beneath. Each one told the story my brother had tried to rewrite. Each one was proof of fairness, of honesty, of the life my father wanted us both to inherit. I sat cross-legged on the floor, shuffling the papers in my lap, letting the dust fall where it would. The air was still except for the quiet creak of the floorboards, as if the workshop itself were exhaling with relief. Somewhere deep in my chest, something shifted. Grief mingled with strength, sadness with clarity. The ache of betrayal remained, but beneath it was something stronger, purpose. I pressed the note to my lips, letting the words soak into me. They were not just instructions, they were a reminder that I could carry the weight, without letting it crush me. I imagined Salman standing across from me, all his calm rehearsed answers stripped away by the truth in these papers. The question rose, heavy and immediate, how do you confront someone who has already stolen so much? I folded the note, placing it carefully on top of the stack of papers, as if sealing my father's trust around it. The trunk felt heavier now, but in a way that made me steady rather than small. I ran my hands over the affidavit again. His signature was firm, deliberate. It carried the authority he never needed to shout. It carried the fairness he had wanted me to see. The realization hit me slowly, this wasn't just about land or money. It was about reclaiming truth. Reclaiming my father's voice. Reclaiming myself. I rose from the floor, standing over the trunk. The morning sunlight had grown, spilling across the workshop in wide, forgiving beams. Dust motes glittered in the light like tiny fragments of hope. For the first time in weeks, I felt aligned with purpose rather than lost in suspicion. Grief remained, sharp and raw, but so did courage. Anger sat beside it, not in chaos but as fuel. The trunk had kept its secrets for decades. Now I held them. The choice was mine, how to use them. I closed the trunk carefully, pressing the key into its lock. The click echoed softly, final and resolute. I stood in the quiet workshop, the papers safely hidden, the note resting above them like a promise. The light shifted across the floor, warm and certain, as if the world was exhaling along with me. The grief and anger and doubt, all of it, had been gathered into something I could carry. Something I could act with. I slid the key into my pocket, feeling its weight against my fingers. I didn't know how the confrontation would go. I didn't know what I would say, what Salman would deny, what he would fight to reclaim. But I knew this, I was no longer unarmed. No longer silent. The trunk had spoken, my father's hand had guided me, and the truth was mine to hold. And somewhere, deep in the still air of the workshop, I felt the first spark of the reckoning to come. The first light of morning spilled across the street, soft and pale, brushing the rooftops with a quiet insistence. I arrived at Salman's gate, papers and letters clutched in my hands, the weight of months pressing into my fingers. The air smelled faintly of dew and dust, a mix of earth waking and the stillness of things left unsaid. He appeared in the doorway, his silhouette rigid, a man I had once trusted and once feared. The sun rose behind him, washing the world in silver light. And in that silence, I understood, some confrontations weren't meant for shouting. They were meant for listening. The street was empty. Houses slept, shutters closed against the rising sun. Only our breaths stirred the quiet, two siblings separated by years of silence and secrets, now standing on the edge of reckoning. I shifted the papers in my hands, letters my father had written, the ledger Nafisa had helped me recover, everything that spoke of fairness, of truth, of promises my brother had tried to erase. Salman didn't move at first. He didn't speak. Just watched, as if measuring whether I could carry the weight of what I now held. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, yes, but there was also clarity. Purpose. The knowledge that the truth could no longer be ignored, hidden, or twisted. I have something you need to see, I said softly, handing him the documents. My voice trembled just enough to remind me that I cared, that this was still family. He took them, fingers brushing mine. The touch was brief, almost accidental. But I felt it, a thread of connection that had survived everything, stretched thin but unbroken. Silence hung between us, heavier than any words. And then, slowly, he began to speak. His voice was low, strained. I thought I was protecting you. Protecting us. But... He looked down at the papers, at the letters, at the ledger, and his shoulders sagged. The mask he always wore, the calm, practiced smile, slipped just enough to reveal the fear beneath. I was bitter, he admitted quietly. I was scared. Scared that you would always be the loved one, the favored one. I thought if I controlled everything, I could fix it. I listened, feeling the truth wash over me in waves. Not the truth I wanted, not the truth I had imagined, but the truth, nonetheless. His hands trembled as he handed back the letters I had brought. I saw the exhaustion, the shame, the collapse of a man who had carried his own insecurities like armor. I never wanted to hurt you, he said. His voice cracked, fragile and human. But I did. I felt something shift inside me. The years of suspicion, the nights of anger, the silence that had stretched between us, all of it began to lose its weight. The morning light fell over us, bathing his confession in gentle clarity, and I realized I didn't need to destroy him. I gathered the letters and papers, letting them rest in my arms like a bundle of reclaimed history. I won't destroy you, I said softly. But I will reclaim what was stolen. And I will honor the truth my father left me. He nodded, almost imperceptibly, and for a moment, the brother I had once known flickered back into view behind the walls of fear and bitterness. The light grew stronger, spilling across the street and the gate, painting everything in soft, pale gold. Shadows retreated from the corners of memory, leaving only the clarity of what had been hidden. He sat down on the step, head in his hands, quiet and unresisting. Not defeated in anger, but broken by the realization of his own mistakes. I stood above him, steady. I could feel the shift, the balance of power no longer defined by fear, but by truth. I didn't speak. There was nothing more to say. Some lessons were carried not in words but in the acceptance of them. The letters, the ledger, the notes, they were mine to carry now. Not for revenge, not for punishment, but for the life my father had wanted for both of us. I walked away from his gate as the sun rose fully, warming my face, spilling light into the corners of the street and the corners of my mind. The papers pressed against my chest. The letters whispered their quiet truths. The morning air smelled of dew and beginnings, carrying the faint promise that some wounds, though deep, could be acknowledged without being fatal. I didn't know if our family could ever be whole again. Perhaps it never would. Perhaps some cracks were too deep to mend entirely. But I knew this, I held the truth. I held the letters, the ledger, the words of my father, and the understanding that dawn, like clarity, could arrive slowly, even after years of darkness. The sun lifted higher, and I felt the first, fragile weight of closure. And as I turned toward home, I knew the day had begun, not just for the world, but for me.